I had just finished the final slide of my systems optimization demo when the door swung open, and Grant Mercer, the new CEO, who'd spoken exactly 3 minutes to me since arriving, cut through the tension like a blade. He didn't sit. He didn't greet the DoD observers seated along the glass wall. He just stared at my patent diagram on the screen and said, "We don't need this. It's pointless, obsolete, unnecessary." The words didn't hit all at once. They slid in slow, like ice under the ribs. Around me, chairs creaked, someone coughed, no one breathed. And I stood there, hands still on the edge of the podium, feeling my own name, my signature on that patent burn in the air, while he dismissed 18 years of work without even learning what it did. I didn't speak. Silence can be reckless. Yes, but there's a deeper kind of silence, the dangerous kind. The kind where every instinct tells you to defend yourself, but your dignity holds your jaw shut. I felt that silence hardening in my chest as Mercer waved a hand toward the screen like he was sweeping dust off a shelf. "Effective immediately. Halt is off the project," he announced. "We'll reassign someone who understands where this company is going." Something inside me dipped the brief, nauseating drop of an elevator that falls one floor too quickly. My vision didn't blur, but the edges sharpened in a way that felt almost unreal, like the moment before a cold wave hits. And that's when I saw it, the man from the Department of Defense shifting in his seat. He didn't look at Mercer. He looked at me, head tilted, brow slightly drawn, as if something about this humiliation didn't make sense to him, as if he recognized a note out of tune. Mercer didn't notice. He was already moving on, already calling in the next presenter, already erasing me from a room I had practically built. I stepped back from the podium slowly, my pulse numb. My pride scraped open, but my mind suddenly, sharply awake. Something had just shifted. Not in the project, not in the room. In me. The moment I stepped out of the conference room, it felt like the hallway stretched twice as long as usual, as if the building itself was pulling away from me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just walked one slow step after another, letting the sting settle quietly beneath my ribs. Pulling back was the only way to keep from breaking in front of people who didn't deserve to see it. And somewhere between the elevator and the glass doors, my mind slipped backward, unspooling memories I'd kept buried for years. 10 years earlier, none of this existed, not the polished prototype Mercer dismissed, not the sleek interface the board loved showing off. Back then, it was just me, a cramped lab, and a stack of DARPA grant paperwork taller than my own patience. I spent nights sleeping on an office couch because the funding cycle was brutal. I built the early model alone, soldering connections by hand, running simulations on hardware so old it clicked when it overheated. The system didn't start as a product. It started as survival, as proof that someone like me could build something no one else could see yet. Those early DARPA reviews were the toughest audience I had ever faced. They tore through my drafts with red ink that looked like open wounds across the margins. But on the final evaluation day, a senior analyst shook my hand and said, "If this works at scale, it won't belong to just the company. It will belong to the country." I didn't understand what he meant until 2 months later, when a federal packet arrived with my name, only my name on the cover. That was the year I was officially designated Inventor of Record Reviewer on the Federal Registry, not because of rank, not because of title, but because I was the original mind behind a technology that flirted too closely with classified thresholds. The designation came with a quiet briefing, a non-disclosure agreement, and a sentence I never forgot. Only the originating inventor can confirm technical integrity in future defense applications. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't something you framed on a wall. It was a responsibility I carried alone, and no one at the company ever knew. They couldn't have. Federal technical clearance wasn't something shared with HR or updated on internal profiles. It lived in a locked database, one you only accessed when the government told you to. As I stepped outside into the sharp morning air, another memory flickered to life, an old email. Years back. from a DoD liaison thanking me for my responsiveness and reminding me that any future modifications must be sent directly to me, not the company. I had forgotten it until now. It was addressed solely to Jolie Hart, not CC'd to legal, not forwarded to leadership, and suddenly, pulling back didn't feel like retreating. It felt like remembering exactly who I was and what they never knew. If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing. The first hint that something was wrong slid into my mind like a cold draft under a locked door. It happened as I sat in my car, hands still trembling on the steering wheel, replaying Mercer's voice calling my life's work pointless. But behind the humiliation, another thought crept in, something older, quieter, and unsettling. 6 months ago, a filing I hadn't thought about since. And suddenly, I wasn't just hurt, I was uneasy. Back then, the company had been flirting with a foreign investment group, nothing official. Just closed-door talks and smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. I remembered standing by the coffee machine, overhearing fragments technology transfer, partial acquisition, supply chain integration, words that made my stomach twist. I knew what foreign investors were capable of when intellectual property wasn't nailed down. I had seen other engineers lose everything because their work was swept into overseas subsidiaries. I wasn't going to let that happen to my patent, so I filed an international licensing intent with the federal system, a perfectly legal protective measure. No contract, no deal. Just a signal that if one day I ever considered foreign licensing, the government would already know the technology originated with me. It was insurance, nothing more. A quiet safety net to keep my work from being swallowed by whatever new direction the executives were chasing. Then Mercer arrived, swinging his weight around like he owned the building and every idea inside it. He didn't know the history, he didn't know the risks, and he certainly didn't know about the filing. But what chilled me, sitting in the parking lot with my breath fogging the windshield, was realizing how fast he had moved. Hours after insulting the patent, he had already ordered the marketing team to incorporate the system into a glossy international brochure designed for global outreach. Marketing had no idea. They were just doing what he told them, pulling diagrams, rendering animations, showcasing features no one outside the country was ever supposed to see. That's when the shiver hit me. Because combining those two things, the protective filing and Mercer's unauthorized international promotion, created a conflict I hadn't anticipated. A dangerous one. I unlocked my phone with numb fingers, searching through my email until I found the federal notice sent months earlier. One line stared back at me. Any foreign-facing commercial material referencing this technology will trigger a foreign licensing signal conflict pending review. My chest tightened. Mercer hadn't just humiliated me. He had unknowingly pushed my patent into a legal category he didn't even know existed. And the moment marketing uploaded that brochure, the system would have recognized it, not because of sabotage, not because of revenge, but because of a paper they never bothered to read and a status they never knew I had already set in motion. Smart viewers will stay for this part, because it changes the whole story. At 6:47 that evening, the office felt different, hollow, like a building already forgetting I had ever worked there. I walked back in, only to gather the last of my things, keeping my head down, keeping my breathing steady, keeping the anger pressed deep where no one could see it. The humiliation from the morning still sat under my skin, hot and unmoving, and every step through the quiet hallway made it burn harder. I pushed open the door to my old workspace, but before I turned on the light, voices drifted from the project room across the aisle. Young voices, nervous ones. Mercer said wipe all her stuff tonight. Everything tied to the old patent, just delete it. Clean slate by morning. Man, she must have really pissed him off. My jaw locked so tightly it hurt. I stayed hidden in the shadow of the doorway, listening as they grouped around a monitor, their confidence careless. Ignorance scraped at the last bit of dignity I was trying to hold together. A mouse clicked, a folder opened. My folder. Okay, here it is. Hart Patent Archive. He wants it gone. I felt the sting rise in my throat, rage and heartbreak tangled so tightly I couldn't swallow either one. They didn't build this system. They didn't bleed for it. Yet they talked about erasing it like it was clutter, like it was nothing. I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because confronting them would have given the moment more weight than they deserved. Ready, deleting now. He hit the keys, and the screen flashed not an error message, not a loading bar, but a bright red banner that made all three of them jolt back. Restricted by federal compliance action, logged. What the is that? A glitch. Why would a patent folder be restricted? They fumbled, whispering, clicking again, trying to force the deletion. Each attempt triggered the same red banner. They looked genuinely confused because they thought they were dealing with a normal corporate directory. But I knew better. I knew exactly what that warning meant. My archive wasn't sitting on the company's server. It hadn't been for years. It lived on a federal mirror, automatically created when DARPA first reviewed my early designs, a safeguard for sensitive technologies. The company only ever interacted with the shadow copy. The real version stayed where compliance rules put it somewhere far beyond Mercer's reach, far beyond theirs, and apparently far beyond their understanding. Standing in the hallway, listening to them panic over a folder they were never meant to touch, something inside me went still, not calmer, not lighter, just still. Because for the first time that day, I realized the truth. They could humiliate me, dismiss me, erase me from the building, but they couldn't erase what they never truly possessed. You're tracking very well. Hold on a few more seconds. This part is for the observant. At home that night, my apartment felt unnervingly quiet, too still, too controlled, almost like the air was waiting for me to notice something I had overlooked. I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, anger drained into a colder, clearer kind of calm. The humiliation, the attempted erasure, the careless cruelty from earlier, it all settled into a single, steady thought check. Everything, not out of revenge, out of instinct. So I opened my personal inbox, typing USPTO into the search bar. A handful of old automated messages appeared, but one thread dated 3 months back made my pulse slow in a different way. It wasn't addressed to the company. It wasn't forwarded to legal. It wasn't CC'd to anyone. It was sent only to me. I clicked it open, and there it was, the confirmation packet from both the USPTO and the Department of Defense, acknowledging my inventor status for the advanced optimization system. But buried inside the attachments pages I had barely skimmed at the time was the one section I now read word for word. In the event this technology is submitted for federal defense contracting, the originating inventor must personally authenticate technical integrity before clearance can proceed. I leaned back in my chair, the cold realization settling deeper with each breath. Mercer's insult from that morning echoed faintly, pointless, obsolete, unnecessary, but now it sounded almost laughably misinformed. He hadn't just removed me from the project. He had removed the only person legally permitted to advance it. A strange, steady quiet washed over me. Not vindication, not triumph, something more controlled, more precise, the kind of silence that comes when a puzzle finally clicks into place. I opened the second attachment, the Federal Project Registry. It required 2-factor authentication. Then a temporary passcode texted to my phone. The page loaded slowly, a progress bar creeping as if even the system understood the gravity. When the screen finally appeared, my eyes moved straight to the bottom line of the status panel. Pending Inventor Technical Authentication, Jolie Halt. There it was, unmistakable and immovable. The project hadn't stalled because of sabotage or a system glitch. It was frozen because my signature wasn't there, because I hadn't confirmed that Mercer's team hadn't corrupted the design, because the law said no one else could. I exhaled, long and steady. Mercer thought he had humiliated me, replaced me, erased me, but the truth was sharper, colder, almost poetic. He had built an entire federal bid on technology that could not move unless I moved it. At 2:11 in the morning, I woke to the sharp buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. For a moment, I thought it was a nightmare bleeding into reality, the humiliation, the deletion attempt, the missing signature revelation, but the cold blue glow of the screen said otherwise. I pushed myself upright. The room dark, the air colder than it should have been for a spring night. Something inside me tightened, a quiet instinct bracing for impact. I hadn't touched the Federal Registry since reviewing it earlier. I hadn't sent a message. I hadn't filed a complaint. I hadn't even replied to Mercer's frantic emails that started hitting my inbox around midnight. I had done nothing, but the world around me had moved anyway. I unlocked the phone, expecting another string of corporate pleas or thinly veiled threats. It wasn't either. It was an automated federal notice stamped Department of Defense, priority flag. I tapped it open, my breath catching at the heading Authentication missing. Federal hold initiated. The same words repeated 3 times in different internal routing blocks, like a verdict echoing through a long hallway. No commentary, no explanation, just the stark truth the system had triggered the freeze entirely on its own. Exactly as federal protocol required, when an inventor of record did not authenticate a defense-bound technology, a chill ran through me, sharp, precise, crawling up my spine in a way anger never could. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't a dramatic gesture on my part. This was simply the law doing what the law was designed to do. The email concluded with a timestamp 2:11 a.m. At that exact minute, the company's entire bid months of projections, presentations, and negotiations had hit an unbreakable wall. Silence closed in around me, dense and heavy, like the air was listening for what I would do next. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even breathe deeply. I just sat there, staring at the notification, feeling a strange, icy pressure settle across my shoulders. Then the phone buzzed again, this time not a notification, a call. The number was unfamiliar, but government-coded. I answered. A man's voice, steady and professional, spoke softly on the other end. Ms. Hart? Yes, I whispered, though my throat felt tight. Long pause. Not hostile, not suspicious, just curious. Are you no longer employed with Mercer Defense Systems? The question landed harder than any insult Mercer had thrown at me. Because the tone wasn't accusatory, it was administrative, procedural, as if my employment status now mattered more to national compliance than to the company that had cast me aside. I'm not. I answered quietly. Another brief pause. Then a simple, measured reply. I see. That explains the hold. The line clicked off, leaving only the hum of silence in the dark, and for the first time since the morning's humiliation, I felt something shift, not explosively, not triumphantly, but with a cold finality that sent goosebumps up both arms. The system had spoken, the freeze had begun, and all I had done was breathe. At 7:30 the next morning, sunlight barely pushed through my blinds when the first flood of notifications hit my phone. Emails, missed calls, frantic message chains. Mercer Defense was spiraling. I stayed in bed, the covers pulled loosely around me, feeling an unfamiliar warmth settle low in my chest. Not joy, not victory, something quieter, steadier, a slow-burning satisfaction that came from simply letting the truth breathe. I didn't answer a single call. Silence was my strategy now, intentional, precise. Meanwhile, the company was drowning in noise. By 8 o'clock, the executives had already launched a full-scale internal scramble. Mercer stormed into the emergency conference room, voice raised, face drained gray. He blamed legal first, demanding to know why no one caught the federal anomaly. Then he pivoted to IT, accusing them of misconfiguring the compliance server. When that didn't stick, he berated the compliance director for not safeguarding project integrity. All of them tried explaining the same thing: the hold wasn't internal. It was federal. But Mercer couldn't accept a reality that didn't bend to him. I watched the chaos unfold from my kitchen table, laptop open only to my email's notification preview. I didn't click anything. Every new alert was just more proof of the storm I no longer stood inside. In the emergency meeting, the government liaison finally joined the call calm, firm, unimpressed by Mercer's desperation. His voice carried the unmistakable weight of protocol. "Let me be clear," he said. "You may restructure your team. You may appoint a new director. You may even replace your CEO if you choose." A heavy silence fell across the room. "But you cannot replace the originating inventor for technical authentication. Only Jolie Hart has that authority under federal review." Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else muttered, "You're kidding!" But he wasn't. And they all knew it. Mercer was reportedly livid, pacing, running a hand through his hair as if fury alone could rewrite national compliance laws. The liaison continued, undisturbed. "The absence of Ms. Hart's confirmation is the sole reason this contract cannot advance." I could almost imagine Mercer freezing mid-stride, but the real blow came moments later when the liaison added, "And for the record, we received a forwarded internal email in which Mr. Mercer referred to Ms. Hart's patent as pointless and her work as obsolete. That complicates your position." Apparently, someone inside had leaked it overnight. I didn't know who. I didn't need to. All I did was sip my coffee, letting the warmth steady my hands, while a quiet, deliberate calm washed through me. Not gloating, not crowing, just knowing finally that silence could be sharper than any retaliation. They were scrambling to fix the mess Mercer created, and all I had to do was sit in my kitchen and say nothing at all. By the time the 37th call lit up my screen, I had finished my second cup of coffee and folded the laundry, moving through my morning with a calm I hadn't felt in months. The panic on their end only sharpened the stillness on mine. I let the phone buzz across the counter, watched the caller ID flash Mercer Defense, urgent, and waited until the vibration finally settled into silence. Then, deliberately, I picked it up and pressed accept. There was no greeting, just Mercer's breathless voice crashing through the line. "Jolie, thank God, listen. We need to talk. The contract is frozen. The system won't clear anything without your authentication. This is catastrophic. You have to sign. Just sign it, and we'll fix everything." His desperation didn't move me. It centered me, for the first time in days. I was the still point in the storm. "Grant," I said evenly, adjusting the sleeve of my sweater, as if this were any other phone call. "I don't confirm technology you publicly declared obsolete." There was a stunned silence on the other end, sharp, brittle, almost beautiful. He tried to recover. "Look, I didn't mean it. You know how meetings get. It was taken out of context. I respect your work. We all do. Please, just authenticate it so we can move forward. The board is furious. The DoD is demanding clarity. We're dead without you." I let him talk himself into a corner. Then I answered with the same steady tone. "I'm not here to punish you, Grant, but I will not distort the truth to clean up your mess. My signature represents accuracy, not loyalty to a company that tossed me aside." He exhaled shakily, realizing I wasn't bargaining, realizing I wasn't angry, just resolute, realizing that nothing he said could change what he had already done. Another voice suddenly joined the call, calmer, more official. "Ms. Hart, this is Deputy Liaison Reeves from the Department of Defense. I apologize for the intrusion, but I'd like to speak with you directly." I straightened, not nervously, but with a quiet authority rising in my chest. "I'm listening." "We've reviewed the situation," Reeves said, "and we believe your insight would help us resolve the compliance conflict more efficiently. Would you consider advising as an independent technical reviewer so we can proceed appropriately?" Mercer sputtered in the background, but Reeves ignored him. My answer was simple, not vengeful, not triumphant. "Of course," I said. "As long as everything is documented accurately," Reeves replied. "That's precisely why we need you." When the call ended, I set the phone down gently, feeling something unmistakable settle over me, Not fury, not vindication, but authority, for the first time. They weren't calling to command me, they were calling to follow me. At 3:40 that afternoon, I walked into the federal conference room with the strange clarity of someone stepping into a moment they were always meant to face. The walls were glass, the table long and cold, the flags behind the panel arranged with surgical precision. For a second, it almost felt ceremonial, like the room itself was acknowledging me. Not as an employee who'd been discarded, but as the person whose work had brought everyone here. Reeves gestured toward an empty seat across from the Federal Review Board. "Ms. Hart, please." I sat, spine straight, shoulders steady, no trembling, no doubt. Whatever power Mercer thought he owned evaporated the moment I placed my folder on the table. Because this time, I controlled the narrative. Reeves opened the meeting. "We're here to clarify the inconsistencies surrounding the Halt optimization system and its submission for defense contracting." I nodded and began. Not emotionally, not defensively, just fact by fact, date by date, step by step. I laid out the original research, the DARPA involvement, the licensing intent filing I made to protect the patent during foreign investment talks. I explained the timeline when marketing had been instructed to produce global brochures, when Mercer removed me from the project, when I discovered the federal authentication requirement. No blame, no accusations, just truth laid cleanly on the table. The panel listened without interrupting. Pens moved, heads nodded, across the room. 2 compliance officers from the company sat stiffly, sweat visibly gathering at one man's collar. Mercer wasn't there. HR claimed he was unwell, but his absence felt like an admission in itself. When I finished, Reeves turned to the company representatives. "Your leadership publicly dismissed the inventor, misrepresented the patent's relevance, and distributed unauthorized promotional material internationally. That violates 3 separate defense compliance codes." One of the representatives stammered. We didn't know." But Reeves wasn't finished. Moreover, he continued, "Removing the inventor of record from mandatory technical verification constitutes misrepresentation of defense technology. It undermines the integrity of the entire submission." The words hit the room like a gavel. Misrepresentation, a federal offense. I felt something ignite inside me, not anger, not spite, but a fierce reclamation. They had reduced me to nothing in that conference room yesterday morning. Now the full weight of the federal government was naming, in plain language, exactly what they had done. Then Reeves slid a document across the table toward me. "This isn't for their project," he said calmly. "We're transferring the contract to another contractor better suited to handle classified technology. We need your signature here to confirm the transition." For a heartbeat, I didn't move, not because I hesitated, but because the moment was bigger than the paper. This wasn't me saving them. This was me defining the future of my own creation. I picked up the pen, signed my name with steady, deliberate strokes. And just like that, the system they tried to erase me from became a system I now controlled completely. At 4:20 that afternoon, I stepped out of the federal building with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The meeting had ended barely 15 minutes earlier, but its consequences were already rippling across every corridor of Mercer Defense. Word traveled fast the company had officially lost the federal contract full termination, effective immediately. All because they tried to build a future on a foundation they didn't respect the inventor. Inside that glass room, while I was signing the transfer documents, the board had convened their own emergency session. By the time I returned my pen to its holder, Mercer was no longer CEO. His badge was disabled, his name scrubbed from internal access. They removed him the same way he tried to remove me decisively, coldly, publicly, but I didn't stay to watch the fallout. That part of my life was already over. As I approached the steps outside, Reeves intercepted me with a small nod and introduced a representative from the new contracting firm, the one set to take over my system under federal supervision. She extended a hand and said, "Ms. Hart, we'd like you to lead the entire implementation division, full authority. full resources, full recognition. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't damage control. It was respect, the kind I had been starved of for too long. We talked briefly, formally, but with an undercurrent of mutual trust. And when she handed me a new packet, the clean, precise contract for the reassigned project, I felt something unclench inside my chest, a weight lifting, a chapter closing on its own terms. I signed. Not for Mercer, not for the company that threw me out, but for the version of myself I was finally allowed to step into as I walked down the steps. The late afternoon sun washed across the pavement, catching the edge of the new folder tucked under my arm. The embossed seal glowed warm and gold, as if the light itself was acknowledging what the signature represented. My work, my authority, my name finally resting where it belonged. And that's the truth I carry out of all this. Sometimes the world won't recognize your worth until your absence forces them to. But you don't have to raise your voice to reclaim your place. Sometimes quiet strength does the loudest work. Before you go, tell me which moment in this story hit you the hardest. And where are you listening from today? I love hearing the journeys behind every screen. If this story moved you, go ahead and comment, like, share, and subscribe so we can keep building this community together. Your support helps these stories travel farther than you can imagine. I'll see you in the next chapter where the quiet ones finally rise. 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 Finally rise.